Hello, my name is Maria, and this is my daughter, Sofia. Last year, we moved from Colombia to Las Vegas. That's where Sofia began having health problems. Doctors told us she had a lot of fluid on her lungs and that she might have cancer. But they said they didn't have enough medical staff to treat her. They transferred us here to Utah. Now, we just say thank you all the time because we're here. We're very grateful because we believe that if Sofia were in Colombia, she might not be with us. I worked in the healthcare field in Colombia, and it is very different. For example, it takes 4 or 5 weeks to get a diagnosis, but time is critical right now. In Colombia, it can take weeks, months, or even years to get diagnosed and receive treatments. What they managed to do in 3 months here wouldn't have been possible there. The cancer diagnosis was difficult enough, but we also faced other challenges. In Las Vegas, we had our jobs, our established life, and suddenly, to come to a city where you don't know anyone, without a job, and dealing with all of this, it has been a big challenge. We don't have family here, it's just the 3 of us, my husband, my daughter, and I. But we've met and have known wonderful people, especially in the medical field. For example, having the Ronald McDonald Family Room at the hospital and the house here has been a blessing for us because we haven't felt alone in this process. From the medical side, the entire medical staff has been extraordinary. I know for many it's just a job, whether here or in the hospital, but not everywhere do you find that level of empathy. And you can really notice it. Not everyone has that. Cultural differences are another big challenge. The language barrier has been the hardest part. They provide interpreters, but it often takes time to find them, so we have to wait and wait to ask questions or clarify any doubts. Or we think of questions after an interpreter already left, and it's too late. It's complicated. Even when an interpreter is right there, they don't always communicate what we want to express. We are trying to learn English, and Sofia understands a lot, but the technical words are really hard for her. The interpreters work hard and do their best, but it's still so difficult. And of course, Sofia says the hospital food could be better. It's not great. She was used to the food I almost always prepared for her. But that's why having the kitchen at the Ronald McDonald House was a real blessing for us. I can cook. Sofia has been very brave. There are many procedures that have been tough, but she has handled them very well. We know it hurts, and there are times she doesn't feel well. But she always puts on the best attitude, and we are very proud of her for that. We have good days, and we have regular days. I never call them bad days, just regular ones. And Sofia is responding very well to her treatments. When we first arrived, she was only breathing with 20% of her lungs. And in just 3 months, her scans show big improvement. Only a small part of the tumor remains. So the results have been wonderful and miraculous. And we thank God for that. We always say that we owe our daughter's life to everyone here. To both the hospital and to the Ronald McDonald House, without a doubt. They have been an unconditional support and ally for us. This process would undoubtedly be much more difficult without them. We will never be able to repay you for everything.
Let me do a quick, brief introduction. Dr. Feola, Dr. Bonnie completed her pediatric internship and residency training at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston. Dr. Bonnie completed additional training, including the Culinary Health Education Fundamentals program in culinary medicine coaching through Harvard Medical School and the Institute of Lifestyle Medicine, Spalding Rehabilitation Center. Dr. Bonnie attended the Park City Culinary Institute Culinary School to earn a certificate in the culinary arts as a chef. Wow, all right. Emmie Gardner is the CEO for Holy Cross Ministries, a nonprofit social service organization that has been in Salt Lake City, Utah for 25 years. Their mission is to respond to the underserved communities' needs for health and well-being via three main pillars of service: health, education, and justice. Emmie is a mission-driven leader with a demonstrated 35-year history of working in nonprofit healthcare, as well as mental health and social service settings. David Pascoe is the Director of Chaplain Community Life for the Spiritual Care Association and International Professional Membership Association for Spiritual Care Providers. He retired from full-time work in healthcare in December 2020 after 4 years as a hospice chaplain and 9 years as lead chaplain and manager of palliative care and bereavement at Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City. And Alyssa is a licensed clinical social worker and an accredited case manager who worked at Shriner Children's in Salt Lake City for 20 years, fulfilling many roles such as discharge planning, outpatient social work, outreach clinics, housing, travel coordination, and case management for patients coming from Mexico. Not easy, no. If you're with me, just give our panelists a quick little hand here. Thank you. I'll start with David. David, you...
Yeah. I asked Oli if I could lead off because my presentation is my T-shirt. Don't have any slides. And I'm just an old, white, straight, well-educated, overprivileged guy living in an established, well-off neighborhood in Salt Lake City. But I wear this to remind me that there's so many people around me in the community who are not like me. And it's sometimes easy to forget when we get into our groups, our families, our conclaves, to forget that there are so many other people out there with so many other views about the world and about life, and who are living and trying to get by, and so that's my shirt. That's my shirt. I was already privileged when I came here as an immigrant in the 1970s from the United States, and during my years at the University of Utah. And my years in local business, I was in the high-tech industry, that privilege only grew, my sense of privilege. As a student, I lived for a while in France. I lived in Spain. I enjoyed the language. I learned the language. I enjoyed the culture. I enjoyed the food. But what opened my eyes to the needs of people not like me and yet living right next to me was my training and my work as a healthcare chaplain. Chaplains are misunderstood. Chaplains are not religious people who come to persuade others that they have certain belongings and beliefs and understandings of life and world and God and good and bad and evil, and that if you would only follow what they believe, it's going to improve your life. That's not what chaplains are about. During my training as a chaplain, which happened at the VA Medical Center here in Salt Lake, I learned that my job was to care for the spiritual and emotional well-being of my patients, their family members, and the staff that I worked with. But also, there was more than that. I was told I should be a cultural broker and acting as a bridge of understanding between my patients and the other members of the medical team. And so I just want to spend a minute reflecting on what does it mean to be a cultural broker. And culture gets defined in many ways. My wife, who's a PhD sociologist, gave me this little easy way to think about culture. And it's a culture, there are kind of three bits of it. What people believe, how people act, their behaviors, and the kind of things they have around them. Beliefs can include religion, but community, politics, the environment, what's right and wrong, what's good and bad, justice, injustice. Behaviors will include things like the relationships that we have, the family systems we belong to, whether we go to a church somewhere, what work do we do, how do we spend our money. And then things, this third aspect, covers everything from the way we dress, what we eat, how we wear our hair, thank you, Orly, the music or the art we enjoy, what we value personally and in our homes and in our family lives. When I first became a chaplain, I thought cultural diversity meant how to work within the healthcare system with people of different religions. I was Methodist at the time, so I thought, oh, great, working with Mormons and Catholics, and maybe occasionally with Muslims or Native Americans, atheists. But when I came to work at Primary Children's Hospital, I met families from all over the world. Brown, black, every skin color in between, some even white like me. They spoke many different languages. Some of them wore different types of clothing. They ate different food. Many prayed to different gods. And most had very different ideas about the American healthcare system they were suddenly caught up in, and how to make doctors and nurses and others understand what they wanted, what they needed, what they were afraid of, and what they hoped for. Maria's story that we heard touched on many of these challenges, didn't it? Being alone with her husband and her daughter, far away from their home in Colombia, but even from Las Vegas, where they had work and had made friends. Not having any work here in Salt Lake, not speaking English very well, and having a hard time even with the most caring interpreters and medical staff. Not being able to give her daughter, I love that, not being able to give her daughter the comfort food of home until she was able to cook, for herself at the Ronald McDonald House. These important aspects of our culture, whoever we are, wherever we come from, being understood for who we are, what we believe, and the things we hold dear, these are what makes life bearable, hopeful, and maybe even joyful again. Sophia she's received excellent medical care during her time in Salt Lake. Her mom says the results have been wonderful and miraculous, and we thank God for that. But it's the acceptance and understanding of others, she says, that's made all the difference. She says people at the hospital and Ronald McDonald House have been an unconditional support and ally for us. So over my years as a chaplain, I've learned that culture is both so much wider and so much narrower than I once believed. Culture is wide enough to include people, as my shirt tells me, who identify as LGBTQ. It includes the homeless, the poor, those with addictions, people underprivileged in so many ways. They are no less deserving of cultural understanding and respect and care, both inside and outside of the healthcare system. But culture is also so narrow. It's down to the beliefs and behaviors and things that characterize a single family. I have a Muslim friend who once told me, when you've met one Muslim family, you've met one Muslim family. Don't assume you know anything about them until you ask. So just to conclude, all of us in healthcare, whether we're doctors, nurses, social workers, chaplains, volunteers, administrators, need to bring that cultural awareness and appreciation to the people we need, the individuals we need. In the end, as my shirt says, we're all human. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Dr. Feola, when it comes to culture, what are your thoughts?
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Yes, it is a pleasure to be here at the Family Centered Care Conference. And I want to thank the Ronald McDonald House and Katie and Maria and Sophia. So I love talking about food and having the privilege of helping families navigate the intersection of food, nutrition, and health. Today, we're going to just talk about culturally relevant food and how it can be a powerful tool in supporting families. My goal in just a few minutes is to share some practical insights that you can use to create inclusive food solutions that promote wellness across cultures. So, food is complicated. Let's dive in. So food holds deep significance for different cultures. Quickly, I'm going to touch upon the cultural practices that shape dietary habits. Respecting food culture preferences builds trust, and culturally appropriate food can improve patient satisfaction. In healthcare, recognizing and respecting cultural food preferences can build trust between healthcare providers and patients. This trust improves patient satisfaction and adherence to treatment plans. This all translates to improved outcomes. So let's make sure we're all on the same page. When we talk about culturally preferred foods, these are foods that match different tastes and needs of someone based on their culture or religion. For example, someone who follows the Muslim or Jewish faith might want to eat foods that are halal or kosher, which are prepared in special ways according to religious rules. In Latino families, the tradition of preparing homemade foods like tamales or empanadas is more than just eating. Food and cooking is frequently a communal event. This reinforces family bonds and instills a sense of belonging. In Native American communities, there's a movement to revive nutritionally dense and culturally significant foods such as wild rice and blue corn. So reconnecting with cultural roots helps improve diet quality. So here are some examples of how nutrition supports growth, manages chronic conditions, and improves outcomes. I think we know this inherently, but I think we sometimes forget that nourishing food is important. So proper nutrition helps children recover quickly after surgery, have shorter hospital stays, and fewer complications. For children who are undergoing chemo and radiation treatments, if they have better nutrient intake, they experience better outcomes and higher survival rates. Hospitalized children are at higher risk of infection. Those are critically ill children in the hospital, but really any child who's hospitalized. So we've heard a lot recently, maybe in the news or social media, about gut health. Gut health is very important and it supports immune system. So things that you can take and eat from foods, preferably rather than supplements, but supplements are good too. Zinc, vitamin C, omega-3 fatty acids helps boost immune function. So critically ill or hospitalized children who receive optimal nutrition have lower risks of infection, shorter hospital stays, and improved outcomes. So what does it look like to be respectful of our family's food knowledge? There may be limitations of food sources and food choices, like Katie talked about access. There may be concerns about budget, family finances, where they live, location, where they've come from, where they're staying, kitchen equipment that they might have access to, recipes, cooking skills. Certainly time is a big barrier for all of us to cook, and confidence. So let's use an example. So maybe we have a child who is on a specific diet, let's say a soft diet, in addition to having food preferences. How can we message for families to be creative? And what can we ask them rather than tell them? What if we ask them, what would that look like? Rather than saying, oh, just take the food and blend it up. What would that look like? How can we be understanding, flexible, and creative in our expectations of food that families put together? Using simple, open-ended questions can start the conversation. So we can ask, what ways have you used to soften or blend food in the past? How do you keep leftover food? And asking questions like that gives families an opportunity to share with us, and we gain insight from a family's cooking habits and maybe what's available in their kitchen. This also might be a window into other needs that the family might have, such as we only have a microwave, or we lose power a lot. So we're making assumptions of telling people, here's the diet, just put it in the blender. But if we ask rather than tell, we're opening up and finding out more. So we should be careful always about making assumptions. instead of just saying, anyway, let me go on. We should be careful about making assumptions. Rather than telling parents or asking them would a blender be helpful or storage containers would be helpful, those things can be helpful. But as I said, opening up and learning about them gives them the knowledge and centers the focus on them as a family and how they do things. So I think it's important for us to remember that sometimes people don't feel comfortable asking for help. And that's okay. We want to support them where they are and make them feel supported and independent. So there are challenges to providing culturally appropriate or preferred foods in healthcare settings. There may be a lack of cultural awareness among staff. There may be limited menu options, and there may be communication barriers with families. So quickly, here's a few ideas on how you might address these challenges. So for your staff, what about educating your staff on different types of dietary preferences from various cultures? What about implementing cultural competency training? For limited menu options, which I know can be caused by budget constraints and things like that, what about just gathering input from families and even staff, and then talking to the food service director, the chefs, even the food vendors that food is purchased from or delivered from, to incorporate culturally familiar ingredients or traditional dishes in a menu. For communication, we talked a little bit about using interpreters. I think that's always very, very important to ensure that families feel comfortable communicating their child's dietary preferences and restrictions. I love that Maria shared that Sophia said the food was not very good. And, you know, Ronald McDonald House has this wonderful kitchen. So that's great that families can support them with the food that's culturally relevant and important to them. Food is important. With these practical insights, I hope you can take away at least one aha moment on how to support families through food. Food is important when thinking about accessing care. Food enhances health outcomes. Food supports family bonds. It builds trust. It improves patient satisfaction. And this helps patients adhere to treatment plans. How can we be respectful of the food knowledge our families have? And just remember, how do we message this to families? When we ask, we are partnering with our families. So this is supporting our approach of family-centered care. Do you need help getting started? This is a helpful toolkit from the CTC on cultural food preferences. And there are 2 quick tips that are embedded in here, but if you're interested in reading more about it, this is a great resource. Just ask families about familiar foods and their preferred foods, and support families using certain food cooking techniques. The Ronald McDonald House Kitchen has a lot of kitchen tools and things like that. Some families may prefer to steam foods because it is their cultural belief that it preserves vitamins. Some families like to slow roast items because they feel it enhances the flavor and also preserves the nutrients. So having those things available is wonderful. Overall, good food makes people feel better. So next slide is my references, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bonnie. Thank you. When you were talking, I'm also a son of an immigrant, and I remember my grandmother's house, the enchiladas and tamales making it was such a huge community event that the whole family was around. Speaking of being a child of an immigrant, Emmie.
Yeah, I know, really.
Hey.
Hi, I usually kind of introduce myself to people as I'm a proud Mex-Italian from the south side of Chicago that ended up in Utah. We were chatting before, like how life takes you on these trajectories you don't anticipate, and 40 years later, I'm still here. Again, Emmie Gardner with Holy Cross Ministries. I have to say I spent 27 of my 30 years in healthcare at Primary Children's. Absolutely love the place. Shout out to Katie and all the work that her team is doing. Spent, I can't remember how many years, Tony, 9 years on the Ronald McDonald board. So I feel like I'm in my tribe right now, and it's great to be back home, actually. So, but what's really interesting too is where I work now. We are a small nonprofit, as I said, that was founded by the Sisters of the Holy Cross when they sold Holy Cross Hospital back in the mid-90s. Some of you youngins probably aren't even old enough to remember there was a hospital on South Temple. Anyway, I'm not trying to be sacrilegious, but fierce, feisty Catholic nuns who really believed in kind of helping the community. When they sold the hospital, they didn't know what to do with the money. And so they did a listening tour. And this is again in the mid-90s. Granted, we're in 2024, but listen to this story. Who did they identify needing help and support? The immigrant community here. I don't know if many of you know, but in the Emmie Gardner Center, that does a lot of our data, our kind of metrics, educates the legislature on kind of trending, says that by 2050, Utah will be majority minority Spanish speaking. I am proud to share that at Holy Cross Ministries, we're not a big place, fierce, feisty staff of 34, 94% of our folks are bilingual, bicultural. And that is by intent. Because as we heard from Maria, as we heard from Sophia, things do get lost in translation. There is a whole different process. We all know how complicated it is to navigate healthcare, right? And then, as she said, we have to wait for the interpreter, or we think of a question after the interpreter comes, or again, in my time at primary, I was super grateful to the CNO prior to Katie, who was super supportive of my desire to say, I can't just use the language services. These kids in cancer care, I ran the cancer center for 15 years, are frequent flyers, right? Why do I have to come in and tell my story to you this week, to you next week, to you the next week, right? They need continuity and they need to pick up where they left off. And fortunately, that nursing leader heard me and said, you're right, you guys need a dedicated interpreter. Also because you're stealing all the hours of the interpreter from the rest of the hospital, right? So you need to have that capability. But it's, again, understanding and recognizing that culture is as important in the healing process for a child and understanding them holistically, right, to really being able to help and support the family. And that's so much of what we're about and what we do at Holy Cross. We have community health workers. I invite you to kind of check the table in the back and talk with Yennefer or Carlos. They are, again, as I said, cultural brokers that help our families navigate the complexity that is the health system, right? And just think about it. Any one of us, right? You yourself, you take a loved one, you try to get into healthcare. I mean, it is complicated. It is crazy. So in addition to knowing that, by 2050, we'll be majority minority Spanish speaking, the other thing for you all to know is, we're seeing an in-migration because of the situations globally around the world, right? So Department of Homeland Security provides data to us. We work really closely with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, which is where the Office of New Americans lives, right? So what we know for the state of Utah is that from March until July, over 4,500 new arrivals have declared Utah as their destination state, right? Those coming from the border, fleeing whatever oppression from their home countries, right? Majority of those are Spanish speaking. And I'm not talking about the refugee groups that we're working with, again, in terms of Afghan or Ukrainian. Those are being managed by refugee resettlement agencies. I'm talking about the folks that are immigrants seeking asylum here in this state, right? We know 4,500 is a understatement. Because we know that people may declare, I'm going to go to Boston, oh, that's not great, or Chicago, and then they end up here in Utah. Or what we hear is people say, oh, I'm Mormon, and then you immediately get sent to Utah, right? So that kind of thing. But I share that in terms of the change in the migration picture for Utah. It used to be young single men coming to find work, right? It is now families. And what that means is they are families like Maria and Sophia, who then have kids, who have needs, and who have care needs or illness or challenges. And so we really need to be looking at how we are able to be, I love the term, I love that you said cultural competence, but I always say no one of us is ever going to be culturally competent, right? You are sitting across from me, you are the expert in your culture, right? So I need to come to you with grace and humility and cultural curiosity and let you teach me, right? And so I think that that's a piece that's super important for all of us in healthcare as we are in that interdisciplinary team that makes that happen, right? I've had the good fortune being at Holy Cross as well. We run a really unique program. It is the only one in the state, again, run by our community health workers. It's called NEF. It's a Spanish acronym for Niños Especiales, Familias Fuertes, and that is squarely at the intersectionality of families with kids with neurodevelopmental disabilities, and we really work with them with that lens of culture and what does that mean. So when you translate that, special kids, strong families. Did you hear kids with disabilities there anywhere? No. That is the name the families chose for their program, right? So it's again that piece of how are we working together? And through this program that we did, I had the opportunity, I guess always a perpetual learner as a clinical social worker, to get a certification in what's called the Leadership Education for Neurodevelopmental Disabilities through Utah State, right? And so one of the other things that we did was a lot of research around what is happening in this situation. And so I would amplify our family-centered care modality to say that the other piece that's super important for any one of us in healthcare and in the supportive community for these families is to think about it in the context of shared decision-making. And what I mean by that too is honoring what everyone has said here. The person with the best lived experience about that child is the family. I was so thrilled to hear what Katie's talking about in terms of the family rounding and all of what is happening and really engaging, because that is so critical that one, in my day in healthcare, and Orly will attest to this, as will probably David, there were those families, right? I can tell you, at the time in Utah when they were deputizing the police officers, right, to notify ICE, we had cancer families that weren't showing up to treatment, right? And we're like, what's going on? They need their treatment. They need their treatment. I mean, this is going to really cure them. They got to stay on the chemo track. And, so then the docs talked to the social workers and we're like reaching out to them, and the families are driving from Wyoming and they're scared the police are going to stop them. ICE is going to grab them and they're going to get deported. And then who's going to take care of their kids, right? So but before knowing that, we identified them as red flag families. They're being non-compliant. We're making all these assumptions, right? And so, really, we come from that place of let's assume good intent, right? And let's really help these families. We gave them letters, said, please, this family's got a life-threatening condition for their kid, let them get to the hospital, right? So again, I think of that, to amplify, shared decision-making is definitely a way to even further pull in families to be a part of that process of caring for their kids. And just last up, I love your shirt, David. We have, again, because it is an election year, and I'm not going political, but we have just come from a place as an organization to say, can we just be good humans to all humanity? Let's just love and embrace that. So thank you.
Yes. Alyssa, your perspectives, please.
Well, Emmie introduced herself, so I'll introduce myself.
girl.
So I am gringa by appearance and by upbringing, but I am Latina at heart and by choice. I have been immersed both personally and professionally in the Hispanic culture for 27 years, 22 of those employed by Shriners. By a raise of hand, and by no means does that make me culturally competent. I have so much to learn still, but I do feel like I've been blessed by many families who have taught me many things over the years. By a raise of hands, how many of you are familiar with Shriners Hospitals for Children or Shriners Children's? Okay, good. I have a former colleague here, and I have the wife of a former colleague here. So I was like, at least two people are going to know who we are. I'm going to forego my slides just for time, but if you want more information, please reach out to Tony and her team, and she can also provide my email address for any questions that you guys might have. As mentioned, I worked in Salt Lake City here at our location for 20 years. Primarily working with families from the northern states of Chihuahua and Sonora in Mexico, but also families from other countries that were Spanish speaking. 2 years ago, I took a position with our international headquarters, and I currently work in the International Strategy Department as a Global Patient Services Coordinator. Now, GPS, right? We all rely on GPS. And so we are guides to help families navigate foreign healthcare systems. Shriners is in a unique position where we can provide care to the patients and their families regardless of the family's ability to pay. We don't worry about insurance. If your insurance covers your care, great. If your insurance doesn't contract with us, no problem. If you're undocumented, no problem. If you have no access to insurance or other health care, no problem. Now, the limits that we do have is that we have 4 service lines. We are a specialty system for orthopedic needs, which is what we do here in Salt Lake, burn care, both acute and reconstructive, cleft lip and palate and other craniofacial deformities, as well as spinal cord injury rehab. We have a big push, as Katie mentioned, to help more kids closer to home. We can do amazing things to try to be culturally sensitive and adapt to people, But in reality, as we have such amazing healthcare, especially specialized pediatric healthcare here in the United States, that does not exist in other countries. And if it does, it's very hard for families to access. And so even though we have this limited service line, we are able to help families from all across the world. We serve over 20,000 international families from 195 countries. That used to be handled by location, and now we have this department that's been built from the ground up and has doubled just in size in the 2 years that I've been there. We have teams of specialists and coordinators that are divided by region, and we have bilingual staff. We have Arabic speakers, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and then we have interpretation services. But you are working directly with someone who is familiar with your language and culture to some degree. We have a lot of immigrant or second generation immigrants that work in our department. And so the ability to help these families navigate not only a foreign healthcare system, we help them navigate getting passports and visas. We help them navigate traveling for families who have never left their little town. I have families from Mexico, I remember, that had never left their town, and then when they saw an elevator, they're like, what do I do with this, right? One of the things that I've learned with families is that we're not exactly great at it, but we are more advanced than a lot of other countries on our views of disabilities and how we accommodate people with disabilities. One thing that I did not understand and that I've learned from these families is having a child with a disability or special need is often looked down as a direct reflection on the parent and maybe something they did wrong or whatever. And so when we look at providing care for the patients, which are our primary clients, we have to know the impact that has on the parents, because they are the ones guiding their children through this process before, during, and after the time that we get to touch with them. Another big thing is that in other countries, and this is obviously a broad generalization, but in other countries, there aren't such things necessarily as patient and family rights. You don't question what your doctor is telling you. You might not even feel like you can ask questions, clarification, whatever, right? So to educate families that here you can speak up, you can ask questions, it's not disrespectful, it's not going to alter the care that your child gives, really empowers the family and makes them such an important part of the team, because if they don't know that, they won't speak up. A couple of other things that stood out, and this totally goes off from what I had prepared, but that's good. Teamwork and connection. That is what it is all about. Think of yourself as the hub in that wheel, right? Connecting all these different things. And that's what I do in my job every day. I'm connecting with the Shriners fraternity who's on the ground helping refer patients and helping family navigate things locally. I'm connecting with my teammates. I'm connecting with the different facilities and the providers there to make sure that we have the best plan of care. I'm connecting with consulates and embassies throughout the world. I'm connecting with organizations like Children's Flight of Hope, Angel Flight, a lot of different, Ronald McDonald House Charities keeps us alive, all of these things, and we are all an important part of that. But if you think of yourself as the hub and you're helping to connect families to those services, that is something that they can't do for themselves. The other thing that keeps coming back and that I really love is what Maria said, to be an unconditional support and ally. And I didn't think of myself as that, but that's kind of what I want to go under my name on my business card now, right? We all have cultural differences, whether we're white, privileged, educated people, whether we are sons of an immigrant, whatever, right? So I want you also to think of yourself maybe as GPS. Global Patient Services is my title, but think of yourself as a GPS, someone who can help families access, navigate, and maximize the healthcare for their child. To talk a little bit more about what Shriners does, we are also, as I mentioned, trying to bring more care to kids closer to home. We do education for nurses and physicians. We do outreach clinics. We do surgical clinics where we go and have our doctors train physicians. And I think those are important pieces as well. We're opening 4 locations in Mexico in addition to the ones that we have, and we hope to provide help for these children closer to home, because for the family, logistically and culturally, that's what's going to be better. But children are the future of our country. Children are the future of our world, and if we can play a part in helping them navigate and maximizing their potential, it's going to be better for all of us.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I just want to point out too, Alyssa, that comment you made about families who have children with special needs, and that it's a reflection on maybe something they have done wrong. Looking at David Shurton, the humanism in all our years in palliative care, and the amount of families, I can't tell you, across the board that had said, what did I do? Is this something I did? I remember a mother who was pregnant and got an in utero diagnosis, and she said, my doctor ordered me on bed rest. I went for a walk around the block. I did this. I should have stayed in bed. That, man, just how that cuts across all cultures. But I couldn't imagine having a whole community of people around saying, this is what happened. Dang. Questions, thoughts?
I graduated from the MSW program up at the U in 2002. And I took a lot of things away from that program, but the one thing I took away the most was being taught to understand the cultures of the people you're going to be working with. I left the social work field after a while, but I've taken that lesson with me in my previous job, or my job I am in now, which is being a QSR, quick service restaurant franchisee, but working with so many different cultures. And if there's one thing that I've taught the other people I work with, is you can't just put everyone in one bucket. And if you can understand the cultures and where they're coming from, and even learn a bit of their language, you're going to get such a better participation, a better response from these people. So it's such an important message that you all just shared. And it just reminded me of that takeaway that I had from my education up at the U. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, it is so critical, right? It takes all of us, right? And I know we always talk about, the U.S. as a melting pot. I'm a big proponent of it's not a melting pot, it's a stew, because that way we maintain our cultural integrity, right? And it's far more delicious that way if we embrace the diversity of all of us. Yeah.
Actually, have you ever heard the song from Tom Chapin, My Town is a Salad Bowl? He says, we're not a melting pot. We're not all blending together. Yeah. We actually have our individual things. So think of slices of tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuces and radishes, that they're all the different flavors and spices, and they're separate, but working together. My town is a salad bowl.
I love it.
If I just say one thing. I used to teach at the University of Phoenix for years, adult students who'd come in at night from 6 to 10 and learn. And the first thing I used to say at the beginning of every class is that learning is a dangerous thing. And you've reminded me of that. Because once you learn something, you can't unlearn it. So once you've been exposed to those experiences of people of other cultures and it's embedded in you, you can't forget it. You cannot. So it changes you for life. And I think those experiences are so important in the work that we do with people from diverse cultures.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm like David. I don't know if Southerner counts as a separate cultural
It does.
life, but
It
does.
totally
So
does.
I'm from the South, yeah. So what brought me here, I came today as a professional. I'm a neuropsychologist, was invited by somebody. It was wonderful. Didn't know it would be so emotional for me today because my son suffered a spinal cord injury. And Dr. Bonnie, I want to say to you, we were in the hospital in Atlanta 8 months, and I hired a cook. I was fortunate enough to have the financial resources to do that. And the entire staff at Shepherd Hospital was really angry with me because they would mock me because, she's got her cook coming in. What she's going to do, she's going to put it in the refrigerator. I don't know why they have to have that food in the first place. They could just eat in the cafeteria. So it made a huge difference for us because our life revolved around, suctioning and moving and everything that you do in the hospital, and and to have the food and to have someone cook and to have that opportunity for us was huge. So this is the first time.
Thank you for sharing that.
That was really, unexpected.
Yeah.
But this was the first time that such importance has been put on that. So I'm grateful that you're here today to hear all of the other things that we're doing as well. So thank you.
For sharing
Thank you
that.
for sharing.
Yeah, food is very underappreciated. It is very healing and it's very nourishing. And I think that we just overlook that. I mean, it's something that we do several times a day. And if we're eating, particularly children, eating the same foods, particularly ultra-processed foods, day in, day out, chicken nuggets, French fries, fish-shaped crackers, I will say, then that is not necessarily improving the diversity of our gut microbiome, not giving us those micronutrients. Food is very nourishing, underappreciated. So thank you for being there for your son.
Hope your son's doing well now.
This lovely family that came up here, we think, we don't know heartache and we don't know that until we experience it. And then even, and I thought I was an amazing clinician before that happened. Now I'm a changed person. And listening, Eileen is her name. She drove 3.5 hours to be here today. I think we'll hear her this afternoon. And to hear what her daughter went through. And it wasn't this Ronald McDonald House that saved me, in addition to the others. It was the one in Atlanta and the one in Fort Wayne. But I mean, he's a quadriplegic. It's a very hard life. It's been almost 10 years. And I think, couldn't we just chop his legs and his arms off so they don't work? Because they're not working anyway. And the spasms are so bad that it really, keeps him from functioning. But we're here because because the NAC up in Park City and all of the resources. And
absolutely.
I moved everything. We moved from it, from Fort Wayne to Atlanta. And that's how we ended up in Salt Lake. So it's a great place to be for services.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a young man I worked with at the Burn Center, the U, who it motivated him to do his therapies and help because he wanted his dad's tacos.
Yeah.
And he had to get to a place where he could eat that. And apologies, Dr. Bonnie, but he also wanted Takis. And I would sit and eat
Food comes in
Takis
all
with him.
shapes and sizes, and
I know.
I think as long as you have a balance, I love dessert myself. So there's times and place for all different foods.
Yeah, but that motivated him. He's like, I want
and
tacos.
it should.
Tacos.
Yes.
And, yeah,
Wonderful.
It was beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, talking about food. So I'm a NICU nurse, and a lot of our moms, they breastfeed, and so thanks to opening up that Ronald McDonald waiting room for our unit, I mean, the moms are getting the nutrition that they need to make that wonderful
Liquid
breast
gold,
milk.
right?
Yes,
Liquid
gold, which, talking about culture, since we're starting to see more of the Spanish communities, they cook their food and they have family that will prepare them, but they didn't have a place like a microwave to warm it up or store it. And, it's all about community-based. And I'm noticing these moms, these Spanish-speaking moms are connecting in that Ronald McDonald room. So I mean, just from me being here working in the NICU for 14 years, since opening that Ronald McDonald waiting room, I mean, I've seen just a difference it's made for the families, especially the Spanish-speaking families. They're so grateful just to have a place to warm their food or even just to get snacks because, the financial cost, there's barriers. They don't have enough money to be driving up to the hospital. And that Ronald McDonald room has provided, so much help. So I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I mean, that shows two important connections, right? Community bonding, friendship, support for each other, and then also the moms who are eating nutritious food, producing healthy breast milk for their babies that need that. And if you think about it, babies that are breastfed are getting the different nutrients and flavors through the breast milk, as opposed to, I have nothing against formula. There's a place for formula, but it's the same every day. It doesn't taste any different. It doesn't provide anything different from one meal to the next, but breast milk changes with what the mother eats and exposes the baby to different flavors. So there are some studies that show how beneficial that is for accepting foods later, being less picky, things like that. So many benefits of, liquid gold. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, thank you. The World Health Organization has done a ton of research on burnout in healthcare, and community is one of those 6 factors. And you listen here, right? Isolation is a killer, and isolation from your community, from your culture, from your food, what that does to people. And that's why when I looked at you, Alyssa, and like the work you do, I thought, man, what a hard job bringing people in and trying to help them.
Well, and I will mention that we also do our best to partner with the social workers at the local hospitals to connect families with the community that's already established there, with our culture. We had a burn patient from Nepal come who speaks a very distinct dialect, and they were able to connect them with the community there and help the mom navigate a lot of things and just not feel so isolated and lonely.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yes. I got a quick question for you guys. Well, first of all, thank you for that wonderful presentation. My question is, have you guys encountered any barriers when it comes to culture within the health organization setting? Because traditionally, it's been all about the classic medical culture, which has been all about the physician, the doctor is the expert. You know, and then we live in a society where we're raised to be very individualistic. So transitioning to trying to bring in the family to participate and to take ownership of the medical environment. Have you guys encountered any barriers? And if so, how have you been able to just kind of overcome changing the way of thinking in the medical establishment?
You know, I think that's a great question. And I think Katie addressed it a little bit in her opening remarks, where I think she was talking about they have families on the board. They have families that are training their residents, right? And like, who better than a parent of a child who's getting care to do that? But I think what we saw through COVID is really that health disparity issue and that access to healthcare disparity issue, right? And so I think the long game is very much, we need to get more diversity into healthcare so that we don't have that colonial model of the white, you know, solely white, you know, primarily male physicians, right? And that people can seek care from someone who looks like them, who speaks their language, who understands their culture, right? But I think that's a systemic change nationally that we're needing to work with, right? And so I know, again, a lot of the work that we do is supporting first gens, and a lot of the limitation for folks in that pathway, when you think about it, or kids that are first gens that are trying, and we saw this through COVID, we lost like, I want to say 17% of the immigrant high school seniors. That's what the State Board of Education said, because they dropped out of school when it went virtual. They didn't finish their high school diplomas. So what does that do to their path and their trajectory for professional development, right? So yes, you see people in CNA roles, you see them in entry-level roles in housekeeping or food service in the hospital, but how do we help them learn that there are pathways? They can become nurses, they can become social workers, they can become PAs, they can become doctors. The rate-limiting step is generally the cost of going to school, right? So how do we help? Again, how are we good humans to all humanity and really look and support opportunities for scholarships so we can diversify healthcare? But sorry, that's a long game macro answer, but I don't know, you guys may have better ones.
I'll give you a very narrow answer. I remember as a chaplain at Primary Children's Hospital, a lot of the issues would come up when you label people and you assume you know all about them, because you got this label on them, and the label is the one that fits the culture. So I got a phone call once from a security guard, and he said, hey, we got a problem. We have a Native American family. There's a shaman coming in. He's going to burn sage in the room. We can't allow that. And I said, okay, give me a room number and let me go down and see what's happening. And so I went to the room, and here's a mom with her young son. And I knocked on the door. I introduced myself. I went in and I said, hey, I've had a message that you have a shaman who's going to come and visit and wants to perform some kind of a ceremony. She said, a what? I said, a shaman, you know, like a religious person. She said, no, the boy's uncle's coming from the reservation. And I said, well, what does he want to do? I've heard he wants to burn sage. And she goes, no, she don't want to do that. You can't burn things in the hospital rooms. She says to me, she said, he's coming and he's going to do a ceremony and he's going to do prayer. And I said, oh, good. So I got the security guard and assured him that we weren't going to be setting off fire alarms. And then when the boy's uncle arrived, he invited me to be with him in the room. which I thought was incredibly respectful and helpful. And so there I was, and he prayed. He had a piece of eagle bone that was a little whistle that he blew. He prayed and did various things, but we didn't burn the hospital down. But there was so many like individual specific things like that. When you put a label on someone, oh, they're Mormon or they're Catholic from Mexico, and you assume now as a system what you're going to do, what they're going to want, that you already know you can't give them because of how your system works. That's the big danger, and that's where education needs to be done. But it really begins with just personal kind of awareness and asking that question: what do you need? How can I help? What is it you'd like to do? Not assume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Takeaways, I think, right? Shared decision making, meeting people and families where they're at, getting their perspective on how they want to approach everything from food to spiritual faith services to community. The idea of being a cultural broker for families and people. And I loved your question, sir, because when I would work with families, I would say the same. The hospital has its own culture. It has its own language. It has its own approach, right? Like everything they do, it's its own culture, and people are coming into it. And so how do we help kind of marry the two? So thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Bonnie, Emmie, David, Alyssa. Let's give them a round of applause.